911. What's the address of the emergency?
It's 608 Southeast Street.
And I couldn't imagine going through that as a mother.
Is greater than. Is greater than. Yeah. Is greater than. Is greater than. My mind is completely blank. The shock hasn't even begun to wear off. Is greater than is greater than. Yet the questions remain. Whispers surround the victim, leaving behind a trail of grim secrets. Certain cases simply freeze the blood in your veins. They aren't merely complex. They completely shatter your reality. You find yourself staring into a void of human behavior that defies logic. The safe bubble bursts, exposing a sinister underbelly you never realized was lurking right next door. Welcome to that dark reality. Bentonville, Arkansas, November 20th, 2012. Dawn hasn't yet broken when a woman checks on her sleeping children. One child rests peacefully, but the spot belonging to her 6-year-old lies vacant. No forced entry, no shattered glass, zero evidence of an intruder. Only a suffocating stillness where a vibrant kid once slept. As dawn approached, that quiet panic ignited arguably the most harrowing investigation in Arkansas history. It unraveled a twisted timeline, proving just how easily a monster can wear a friendly mask in plain sight. Living adjacent, passing as a trusted ally, this tragedy permanently altered how we view neighborhood security and blind faith. By the time we unravel these facts, you'll never look at a familiar face the same way again. We are diving deep into the chilling mystery of Jersey Bridgman. Before descending into this rabbit hole, let me know your viewing location down below. I check every response. Make sure to tap subscribe if you're drawn to investigative deep dives. Fresh case files drop frequently, and our upcoming investigations are heavily guarded secrets you'll want to see. Let's return to that deceptive Arkansas town and trace the sinister footsteps leading up to that vanished child. Grasping the gravity of this crime requires knowing its backdrop. Arkansas is deeply rooted in traditional Southern charm. Uninitiated visitors often describe it as the quintessential postcard of authentic small-town America. Desolate highways carving their way through dense, ancient woodlands. Tight-knit communities built on blind trust, shadowed by the sprawling majesty of the Ozark Highlands to the northwest. Lush, isolated, and remarkably slow. Deep hollows shelter residents who prefer a secluded, undisturbed existence. Endless hiking paths weaving past pristine waters. It attracts those desperate to escape the chaotic grind of modern life. Nestled tightly within that rugged northwestern terrain lies Bentonville. Globally recognized for hosting a massive retail empire, yet fundamentally it operates like any other interconnected suburb. Children roam the streets freely until dusk. Violence feels like a foreign concept, entirely detached from their reality. This was Jersey Bridgman's sanctuary. By the autumn of 2012, she had just turned 6. However, the underlying nightmare began brewing months prior to her disappearance, rooted in deeply unsettling circumstances. A fractured home left David and Desiree splitting time with their young girl. Her mother provided absolute safety and warmth, but a deeply disturbing reality festered at her father's house. Law enforcement first caught wind of the danger when red flags regarding her welfare triggered a sudden intervention. Detectives immediately launched a deep dive probe. They exposed a living space steeped in systemic neglect, utterly unfit for a vulnerable minor. Rogers detectives discovered a horrifying dynamic. The child was essentially treated like a captive, stripped of all autonomy. Under intense interrogation, her father David offered a flimsy defense. He insisted he never meant to be malicious, using the excuse of preventing his daughter from wandering the halls after dark. Lead investigator Larry Taylor noted how the suspect confessed to a slippery slope of increasingly severe restrictions. The father and his partner, Jana, allegedly brainstormed legitimate safety measures, but blamed their twisted actions on a lack of household funds. Rather than seeking help, they resorted to deeply disturbing methods to keep the 6-year-old contained. Even as physical distress became obvious, the abuse morphed rather than ceased. This culminated in both adults being handcuffed in late 2011. Facing a mountain of evidence, the couple took plea deals acknowledging the horrific conditions they forced upon the child. Her father was handed a stiff 18-year sentence behind bars. The monster was finally caged. A 12-year prison bid, plus 3 extra when probation shattered. For little Jersey, that house of horrors was permanently in the rear view, or so they thought. She was safely relocated, placed back into the permanent custody of her biological mother, Desiree. Enrolled over at Sugar Creek Elementary in Bentonville, the traumatized girl finally began to decompress. Her educators saw the transformation immediately. Relatives felt the difference. Even casual bystanders sensed a peaceful shift in this resilient kid who had already survived nightmares most adults couldn't begin to fathom. Everyone who crossed her path painted the exact same picture: fiercely bright, endlessly affectionate, and vibrating with an untamable radiant spirit. Her mere presence brought absolute sunshine to the darkest spaces. She fiercely protected her 2-year-old baby sister, Leah, treating that sibling duty like a sacred mission. Hovering like a guardian angel, she displayed a profound, nurturing empathy that completely defied her young age. An inner circle friend perfectly summed up the mystery. How did she survive such hell and still flash that beautiful grin every single day? Spring of 2012 brought a fresh chapter. Desiree relocated her girls to 608 Southeast A Street in Bentonville. A new roof meant a clean slate finally, a legitimate shot at normalcy. Sharing the property line next door? A young married pair named Amanda and Zachary Holly. The two mothers instantly bonded. It was that effortless, over-the-fence camaraderie you lean on when life gets chaotic and you desperately need a lifeline. Zachary clocked hours at a nearby diner. He was a quiet shadow, a guy who firmly minded his own business. He played the part of the laid-back, friendly neighbor flawlessly. Zero warning signs, absolutely nothing lurking beneath the surface to trigger alarms. To the little girl, he was simply Uncle Zach. For a brief, deceptive window, life was perfect. Safe streets, trusted friends within arm's reach. Here was a fiercely devoted mother, moving mountains to hand her kid a normal existence after the universe had already robbed her blind. On the surface, it painted a picture of beautiful healing. In reality, it was a ticking time bomb. Fast forward to November 2012. The overlapping dynamic between both households operated like a well-oiled, predictable machine. If Desiree or her boyfriend Brandon pulled the graveyard shifts, they tossed the kids over to the Hollies for nighttime babysitting. This handoff was so aggressively normal that it barely registered on their radar, just standard operating procedure on Southeast A Street. It was the ultimate suburban safety net forged in blind trust, deep comfort, and that dangerous, naive assumption that knowing someone's face means knowing their soul. Nobody batted an eye. There was zero reason to. The little girl had just blown out 6 birthday candles. 6 days later, the illusion shattered. Monday night, November 19th, 2012, Mom clocks in. Her partner Brandon walked out the door to start his own evening grind. Following the exact same script as always, the two sisters walked across the yard to post up with the Hollies for the night. Totally mundane, not a single thread out of place, just a typical Monday in a tight-knit community where doors stayed unlocked. Fast forward to roughly 11 p.m., Desiree wraps her shift, pulls up, and knocks next door to grab her sleeping daughters. The kindergartner was barely awake, floating in that heavy, silent fog kids get when they've been kept up way too late. Carrying her precious cargo back home, she slid both siblings under the familiar blankets they always shared, climbing right into the bed next to them. Right on cue, the child performed her nightly ritual. Peeking through half-closed lids, she softly promised her mom that she loved her to the moon and back. It was her trademark goodbye, a beautiful, tiny anchor to close out the chaos of the waking world. That innocent whisper would be the final thing she ever said to her mother. Daylight broke. Desiree stepped into the kids' room to find the toddler sleeping soundly, but the older sister's half of the mattress? Completely vacant. Zero explanations, no dragged footprints, not a single trace of how the nightmare unfolded in the dark. Panic setting in, she tore through the floor plan, screaming her child's name, ripping open wardrobe doors, hunting down every conceivable hiding spot a terrified kid could find. Absolute silence. Frantic, she dialed her mom. They blitzed the property a second time, turning up ghosts. That's the exact moment anxiety mutated into raw, suffocating terror. Glancing through the glass, Desiree caught sight of her neighbor lounging casually on the adjacent front patio. She sprinted across the lawn, begging to know if the missing girl had wandered over at dawn. The response was a chillingly blank negative. At exactly 6:43 a.m., she frantically dialed 911. Dispatch immediately demanded her coordinates. She choked out the street name, desperately pleading for backup. Law enforcement didn't waste a single heartbeat hitting their sirens. You don't drag your feet when a kid vanishes into thin air. Protocol goes out the window every ticking second is an absolute life-or-death scramble. Cruisers swarmed 608 Southeast A Street, deploying units instantly. They dismantled the family's residence, tearing through every square inch. The tactical sweep bled over into the neighbor's house. Cops flooded the entire block, grid-searching every shed, crawl space, and blind corner within striking distance. But the little girl had completely evaporated. A perfectly untouched home. No shattered glass, no jimmied locks, absolutely zero clues to explain how a little girl simply vanishes into thin air. Until patrolman Travis Nichols caught a chilling anomaly 2 houses down. The rear entryway of property 74, a decaying abandoned shell, was pushed wide open. Barely cracked, honestly, just a subtle shadow. Yet it screamed out of place against the manicured silence of that suburban block. Nobody had lived there for months. Nobody should have been inside. Nichols and his partner, Mike Henson, cautiously closed the distance, hands resting near their holsters. Slipping quietly into the gloom, the cops swept the rotting rooms. A suffocating dead air hung over the property. Trash littered the floorboards beneath an oppressive quiet. The unmistakable haunting aura of a structure totally abandoned by the living. Then they hit the master bedroom. That exact moment was when the frantic manhunt met a crushing, permanent halt. The stunned officers instantly backed out, throwing up a hard perimeter and frantically radioing for every available unit in the county. Red tape demanded a judge's signature before forensics could sweep the hellscape. The authorities held their ground outside as the sleepy avenue slowly woke to an absolute nightmare. Frantic relatives began swarming the pavement. The young victim's grandmother, Vicky, marched straight up to the yellow crime scene tape, whispering a single terrifying question to a uniform. Was her grandbaby inside? The cop was paralyzed, utterly speechless. But the sheer devastation burning in his eyes delivered the fatal blow. Vicky later confessed she felt that awful wave of absolute clarity. No official statement was needed, the grim truth had already settled into her bones. Absorbing that sickening reality purely through a stranger's grimace scarred the surviving relatives forever, cementing a trauma that spoken words could never capture. Later, investigators escorted the child's maternal grandpa down to the morgue to legally identify the remains. An unthinkable horror for any elder to endure. It fractures a human soul irreparably, leaving behind permanent psychological wreckage. Barely 60 minutes passed before Southeast A Street transformed into an active war zone, completely choked by miles of yellow barricade ribbon. Media vultures descended fast, planting their massive broadcast lenses directly on the residential concrete. Shivering locals hovered on front stoops in the frosty dawn, trading paranoid whispers as they desperately tried to decode the tragedy unfolding right in their own backyards. The cops kept their mouths tightly shut. A suffocating dread swallowed the pavement, fueled by terrifying mysteries and zero solid facts. Just outside the Bridgman residence, a tiny bike rested perfectly still, an eerie monument waiting patiently for a little rider who had vanished forever. Inches away lay a wrinkled, half-dead princess balloon discarded in the dirt, innocent suburban artifacts that had suddenly mutated into gut-wrenching, sinister symbols of a hijacked youth. Bentonville Captain John Simpson finally faced the press gaggle, dropping a massive, unyielding warning to the public. Every single soul orbiting the victim's life, friends, passing acquaintances, even ghosts from her final 72 hours, was about to be subjected to a ruthless, microscopic interrogation. The hunt had barely ignited. Yet, the darkest secret of all was likely hiding right there on that very street, lurking directly under their noses. Federal agents have officially hijacked the local probe, teaming up with Bentonville detectives to crack this sinister puzzle. Aggressive interrogations are already underway, and tactical units have raided 3 separate properties right where the grisly discovery occurred. Law enforcement claims the manhunt is accelerating at breakneck speed, despite having absolutely zero suspects in cuffs. We are aggressively pursuing every tactical maneuver available right now, and I fully believe the ugly truth is dangerously close to surfacing. But let us not be fooled by the official narrative. 48 hours have bled away, and the actual mechanics of this slaughter remain suspiciously hidden in the shadows. Detectives refuse to name their targets or explain why they instantly branded this a homicide. They remain dead silent on the exact cause of death or whether the child endured any horrific abuse beforehand. This nightmare cuts entirely too deep for her bloodline. It has completely shattered this once safe town. Truthfully, the stakes are astronomically high for every single person watching this unfold. The impending holiday break will not slow down this relentless manhunt one bit. The surrounding blocks are completely terrified by their proximity to pure evil. The child's remains were ultimately located inside that rotting, empty structure right over my shoulder. Sun glare makes it tough to spot through the thick tree line, but crime scene techs have been swarming that property since dusk, refusing to leave as dawn breaks. Bentonville top brass officially stamped this a murder. Now, an aggressive, boots-on-the-ground search for the killer or killers dominates the morning agenda. Here are the chilling facts we have verified so far. Forensics tore apart the exterior of this property all day Tuesday, immediately after the 6-year-old simply vanished, only to be discovered a mere 2 houses away from her own bed. Today, detectives are expected to rush another wave of grim clues down to the Little Rock State Lab. We can also verify that a judge's sign-off is the only thing keeping them from tearing apart more homes on this very block. We are actively eyeballing multiple persons of interest right here on Southeast A Street, just behind the perimeter. That specific property is far from our only target. Detectives are currently securing legal paperwork and utilizing covert tactics to completely gut several other suspect locations. A little girl vanishes into thin air, leaving a terrifying void. Cops are dangerously quiet this morning. We are desperate to unmask the predator, and everyone is wondering, who is hiding the dark truth? As the clock ticked down those agonizing first hours, local law enforcement and the FBI locked down the investigation. There was absolutely no time to tread lightly. Every second mattered. A kid was gone under incredibly sinister circumstances, and the terrifying reality was that nobody had a clue why. What detectives could rely on was the map, a tight, insular suburban trap where only a handful of individuals had physical access to Little Jersey right before the darkness swallowed her. Armed with gritty street instincts honed over decades of hunting predators, they knew the horrifying reality. The devil usually lives next door. They began ripping the neighborhood apart, thread by thread. The mother, Desiree, hit the interrogation room first. Detectives grilled her, forcing her to retrace every agonizing second of that night. Clocking in at her job, walking back through her front door, picking up her daughters, tucking them in, and that heart-stopping moment she woke to find her baby's spot completely cold. Her timeline was bulletproof. 0 red flags, 0 shady gaps, just a traumatized mother fighting off a total breakdown to help hunt down her daughter. Authorities then threw the spotlight onto her boyfriend, Brandon. His story checked out instantly. Time cards and eyewitnesses proved he was grinding away at work while the nightmare unfolded. He was swiftly crossed off the suspect list. Detectives then pivoted to the neighbors. Amanda Hawley took the hot seat, delivering a narrative that mirrored Desiree's timeline flawlessly. She verified that she and her husband Zachary babysat the kids earlier. She swore Jersey made it back to her mother's place safely. Nothing in her demeanor tripped any internal alarms. She played the part perfectly helpful, tearful, and seemingly devastated by the tragedy. Then, 28-year-old Zachary faced the music. The trusted neighbor, the designated sitter, the very guy this little girl affectionately dubbed Uncle Zach. Outwardly, he painted the flawless picture of a totally innocent bystander. Super eager to assist, he surrendered his evening wardrobe to cops before they could even demand it. He cheerfully surrendered DNA, faked deep sympathy for the grieving family, and didn't stutter once during his grilling. Recalling checking the clock, noting it read 3:35, feeling nauseous, deciding to hit the local mart for some medicine. He played his hand beautifully, yet one tiny nagging detail in his story had detectives smelling blood in the water. Zach claimed he jolted awake around 3:35 a.m. with horrible cramps, supposedly desperate not to wake the house. He claimed he took a solo, 150-yard stroll through the dark to a local gas station for stomach medicine. Security cameras did catch him buying the items exactly when he claimed. He swore he scurried right back into bed and didn't whisper a word to a single soul until dawn. In a vacuum, it is a solid alibi. Folks get sick at ungodly hours and make midnight snack runs. It is totally ordinary, except there was a glaring, sinister coincidence hiding in plain sight. That identical shop, the one Zach creeped out to at 3:35 a.m., was the exact location the terrified mother raced to hours later to tell her boyfriend his stepdaughter was gone. When you are piecing together a lethal puzzle second by agonized second, a bizarre overlap like that screams guilty. Cops flag it immediately. They dig their claws into the discrepancy, dragging the suspect back into the box. Zach was hauled in for round 2. He didn't flinch. Ice cold and unwavering, he repeated the script, got sick, walked to the shop, went back to sleep. He forcefully denied knowing anything about the horrors inflicted upon Little Jersey. Behind closed doors at the state crime lab, forensics experts were burning the midnight oil right through Thanksgiving, hunting for the biological smoking gun, tearing through every fiber and microscopic trace with obsessive precision. What was brewing in those test tubes was about to blow this dark mystery completely wide open. Every cop on the payroll knew those lab results held the key to a monster's cage. Out on those suburban streets, oblivious locals banded together, trying to fight off the suffocating dread. Over 100 grieving souls huddled at a candlelight vigil, mourning a tragedy they couldn't comprehend. Who holds a vigil candle for a kid they just butchered? That freezing November night, neighbors huddled together, their tiny flames piercing a suffocating, grief-stricken darkness. Desperate for words to make sense of the horror, the crowd ultimately realized that dead silence was the only truth left. Is greater than. Is greater than. We were desperately trying to wrap our heads around this nightmare. Honestly, just trying to navigate this overwhelming heartache ripping through our town, while drowning in terrifying questions that nobody could actually answer for us, right now. Getting together out here just seemed like the only sane response we had left. Is greater than, the center's head director, Beverly Engel, eulogized Little Jersey with the raw, intimate heartbreak of a true confidant. She described the victim as a rare light, a remarkably wise old spirit trapped in a child's body, radiating absolute sunshine. The entire campus at Sugar Creek Elementary draped themselves in purple to honor the slain girl, a quiet, powerful tribute designed to scream her name into the void when language utterly failed them. Meanwhile, locked inside a penitentiary cell miles away, her biological dad was flat-out barred from burying his own daughter. But as the clock ticked, detectives quietly tightened the noose on a highly specific target, Zachary Hawley. The guy's timeline was a massive red flag. His family ties, a bizarre midnight convenience run, and a highly suspicious biological swab. Detectives meticulously dissected his every move, cross-checking his alibi against a mounting pile of sinister hidden truths. Suddenly, a pair of back-to-back bombshells completely blew the entire investigation wide open. Is greater than. Let me get this on the record, Zach. Taking this lie detector test was entirely your own call, presumably to get the target off your back. Is greater than. Yeah, absolutely. Because I need you guys to catch the actual monster. Is greater than bombshell number 1. Holly actually cornered Detective Chris Moffat himself, practically begging to be strapped to the polygraph machine. Authorities happily obliged and hooked him up. 3 days later, those specific results triggered a secondary, massive break. And this specific revelation was the fatal blow to his innocent neighbor act. Forensics at the state laboratory finally processed the crime scene trace materials, and the biological crosshairs locked onto a solitary target. They dragged Zachary back into the box for the endgame. Only this time, the polite facade was completely dead. The interrogators walked in armed to the teeth with classified forensic lethality. They deployed gruesome holdback evidence, blood-chilling crime scene anomalies intensely guarded from the press, the public, and local rumor mills since day one. Secrets that solely belonged to the phantom who actually stalked through that nightmare. Under the crushing psychological pressure, Holly's armor cracked. The meticulously crafted web of lies simply disintegrated. During a tense standoff, he inexplicably mapped out the exact floor plan of the abandoned death trap at Property 74. Pen in hand, he sketched the morbid blueprint, pinpointing the corridor and the bathroom, unwittingly confirming his unholy midnight prowl. That's the hallway. Bathrooms right over here. These were the chilling, undeniable echoes of an intruder vividly reliving the scene. A predator intimately familiar with the carnage inside. A liar whose psychological firewall had just catastrophically collapsed under the truth. Handcuffs clicked. Zachary Hawley was officially caged. Shockwaves gutted the neighborhood instantly, because this predator wasn't some faceless drifter creeping out of the shadows. He was the very guy lurking right behind the crime scene barricades during the pitch-black dawn of November 20th, blending in with his striped knit hat and dark coat, rubbernecking with devastated neighbors. He even pretended to hunt for the missing child. He had literally comforted her weeping relatives, a wolf completely integrated into their inner circle, soaking up their absolute trust. The exact same man the little girl affectionately called Uncle Zach. Bentonville authorities confirmed the evening capture of 28-year-old Zachary Dwayne Hawley, slamming him with capital homicide, abduction, and home invasion charges. We are broadcasting live at daybreak directly from the suspect's doorstep at 702 Southeast A Street. The residence is chillingly wedged halfway between the victim's bedroom and the Tuesday morning dump site. This grim hunt utilized heavy backup from Rogers City cops, the Benton County Sheriff's Squad, and a massive coalition of tactical units forming the Regional Child Abduction Strike Force. Furthermore, rapid forensic analysis from the Arkansas State Crime Lab proved absolutely vital in executing this swift takedown. Is greater than, although her blood relatives were noticeably absent from tonight's official media briefing. Sources definitively confirmed that the grief-stricken household is fully aware the monster is caught. Actually, Chief Simpson was personally spotted inside the wake earlier today, quietly delivering the justice update directly to the mourning parents, warning the inner circle that the department was about to take this explosive breakthrough public tonight. So the family definitely knows the score. That said, it remains unclear if any undercover loved ones silently infiltrated the precinct crowd during this evening's broadcast. A twisted game was just beginning. Slapped with the absolute harshest penalties Arkansas could legally trigger, Zachary Hawley was shoved into lockup as the dark procedural machinery cranked into gear. Just 24 hours before facing the judge, the jailhouse itself became a powder keg. Somebody slipped past the guards during standard rounds, sliding right into his holding cell for an unauthorized confrontation. Deputies shut the ambush down fast before any real blood was spilled, yet that terrifying security breach proved the lethal level of outrage brewing inside. Captain Chris Spark had to do damage control. Every single prisoner knew exactly what this guy allegedly did, thanks to an aggressive 24/7 news cycle. He swore to provide absolute protection, promising they would guard the suspect just like anyone else on the cell block. That guarantee perfectly highlighted the razor-thin line between pure vengeance and blind justice in a broken town. At the eye of this legal hurricane stood a suspect who had brazenly joined the frantic search party for the very child he made disappear. Bentonville braced for an incredibly dark, grueling ordeal that was barely scratching the surface. Justice loomed ahead. Slapping cuffs on this guy offered absolutely zero comfort to the shattered locals. Honestly, it twisted the knife deeper, forcing neighbors to grapple with something far more sinister than a tragic accident. They were staring into the eyes of the accused, a completely familiar face from their own streets. A guy they casually chatted with, who had boldly lingered right where the horror went down, wearing fake empathy like a cheap mask. That caliber of deep deception delivers a psychological gut punch that doesn't just fade. It festers, and the looming trial guaranteed every local would bleed through the entire sickening ordeal. Loved ones huddled together outside Rollins' funeral home as the dark vigil for Little Jersey kicked off into the night. Mourners trickling in included grieving staff from Sugar Creek Elementary, the very school where she spent her final innocent days. Hours prior, educators faced the completely impossible task of explaining this nightmare to her traumatized classmates. Principal Pam Blair stepped up to try and manage the horrifying fallout. She kept the terrifying details buried, only revealing that their friend was gone and cops were aggressively hunting for answers. Kids sketched out their trauma on paper, giving counselors a chilling glimpse into whose minds were fracturing the most. The heaviest emotional damage struck the 3rd and 4th graders, who actually grasped the dark reality. 35 to 40 children required immediate, intensive psychological intervention. Marched before a judge, the suspect was an absolute ghost, ignoring flashing bulbs and refusing to look his accusers in the eye. Shrouded by armed guards in a standard-issue jumpsuit, his face remained terrifyingly blank. You could practically taste the hostility, a heavy, suffocating dread shared by a crowd desperate for retribution but trapped by protocol. The magistrate methodically listed out every single horrific accusation. These weren't minor infractions. They were the absolute deadliest allegations Arkansas could legally throw at a person. With every grim syllable spoken, the gallery held a collective, agonizing breath. Look closely, and you'd see his fingers violently trembling beneath that icy exterior, right before he coldly denied everything. Assigned a state lawyer and stripped of bond, he was locked down indefinitely while the dark saga played out. Enduring that initial hearing was pure psychological torture for the victim's devastated relatives. It offered zero peace, just the brutal starting gun of an agonizing journey toward an elusive truth. Before legal teams could clash, two separate psychological profiles were ordered to probe his mind. The state demanded the first. His own team demanded the second, running a completely isolated mental deep dive behind closed doors. Both doctors returned a chillingly identical verdict. The defendant was totally sane and fit to stand trial. He fully comprehended the massive trouble he was in and possessed the cunning clarity to fight for his life. That psychiatric stamp of approval erased any legal loopholes, yet this twisted case still harbored bizarre detours. Suddenly, one of his lead defense lawyers dramatically pulled out, dropping a bombshell resignation on the judge. Pointing to severe personal issues, counsel frankly admitted he couldn't provide the aggressive defense this high-stakes trial demanded. This highly suspicious move threw an immediate wrench into the gears of justice. Everything ground to a halt while the court scrambled to secure a new legal shark and brief them on the gruesome evidence. For the grieving relatives, every single stall felt like a brand new knife in the back. Was the system stalling on purpose? Each delay trapped them in a purgatory of endless agony, starving them of the one thing they desperately craved. Closure always dangled just out of grasp. It took a brand new defense attorney stepping in to finally shove this twisted case into the spotlight. When Judgment Day arrived, the courtroom was packed to the brim with loved ones. Cops who worked the gruesome scene, hungry journalists, and hardened locals all crammed into the gallery, desperate to see how this nightmare would end. Everyone who had obsessively tracked this horror story locked eyes on the defendant as he nervously shifted around in his wooden chair. His knuckles turned white. He bounced between an eerie, dead-eyed stillness and sudden violent twitches as the crushing pressure of the room swallowed him. The suffocating gravity of the proceedings threatened to completely crush the grieving parents sitting just feet away. Meanwhile, state prosecutors were quietly assembling an absolutely airtight, merciless trap. The state called upon Frank Petty, a heavyweight forensic expert, whose testimony would soon become the linchpin of their entire strategy. The gallery hung on his every syllable. They weren't captivated by blood or gore either. Instead, it was the chilling, calculated rhythm he used to feed his horrific discoveries directly to the captivated jury. His voice never wavered, carrying the ice-cold detachment of a veteran who had spent decades unearthing humanity's darkest secrets. He calmly told the court that he recognized the sinister nature of the crime scene the second he began his analysis. Step by painstaking step, he translated raw forensic data into a terrifying narrative of exactly what transpired. He laid out the grim breadcrumbs, forcing the jurors to visualize the pure evil that unfolded inside that abandoned property on Southeast A Street. He brought up tiny, innocent trinkets belonging to little Jersey items meticulously cataloged by crime scene technicians. Those heartbreaking little fragments shattered the sterile legal atmosphere, bringing a visceral, devastating reality crashing down. A deafening silence choked the room. Spectators averted their eyes as muffled sobs echoed from the wooden benches. Jersey's relatives huddled into a tight, desperate knot, gripping one another like a lifeline over a bottomless abyss. And Zachary? He just stared blankly at the floor, not a flinch. Then, the state unleashed the physical evidence. Every disturbing artifact pulled from the shadow of the investigation was paraded right in front of the horrified panel. They displayed the exact physical proof of the carnage responding deputies had stumbled into on that fateful night. Even the most deeply callous detectives struggled to stomach the display. You could practically feel a physical shockwave ripple through the gallery. It was a toxic cocktail of sorrow and sheer disbelief, the suffocating realization that monsters truly do walk among us. Yet, while confronted with his alleged atrocities, Zachary Hawley remained a stone-cold statue. Not a single muscle twitched on his face. Then, prosecutors hit play on a deeply unsettling snippet from his police interrogation tape. Each prolonged hesitation on that tape dripped with guilt. The dead air lingering between the detective's questions and his answers screamed volumes. The spectators sat absolutely paralyzed. Next, the forensic lab drops the hammer. Expert Lisa Channel from the Arkansas State Crime Lab took the stand, revealing a twist about the biological swabs. She admitted that some genetic markers pulled from the scene did not definitively lock onto Zachary's DNA profile right out of the gate. But she quickly flipped the script, reminding the panel that the biological evidence had been heavily degraded by harsh environmental elements. That severe contamination, she warned them, meant those isolated swabs proved absolutely nothing on their own. The prosecution immediately countered by calling senior forensic analyst Melissa Main to testify. She surgically broke down the sprawling forensic data, stripping away the scientific jargon to feed the jury the raw, terrifying truth. Biological traces that were undeniably linked to Zachary Hawley's genetic blueprint, she declared, popped up across several independent swabs collected from various, completely distinct crime scenes. He was pinpointed as the absolute primary source of that DNA. Then, she dropped a final, expertly crafted bombshell before stepping down. "I cannot state this with 100% scientific certainty," she confessed to the panel, "but I am equally confident that this man cannot be ruled out." In a tense room begging for answers, that statement hit like a freight train. It wasn't cheap theatrics. Every single person breathing the air in that gallery knew exactly what she was implying. But nothing could have prepared the crowd for the psychological curveball that came next. The defense team refused to call a single witness to the stand. Zero. And throughout both their opening remarks and closing pitches, Zachary's legal counsel danced right on the bleeding edge of a total confession. They practically looked the jury in the eye and conceded their client was the monster responsible for slaughtering little Jersey Bridgman. This was a brilliant, deeply cynical strategy. They weren't fighting for an acquittal, and they definitely weren't trying to plant reasonable doubt. What does it take to create a monster? The jury didn't need long to decide. Zachary Hawley was convicted on every single charge. Breaking into a home, holding a little girl captive, alongside a slew of other horrifying crimes. And the ultimate sin, cold-blooded murder. The moment that verdict dropped, the air in that courtroom completely shattered. Jersey's relatives clung to one another. Tears flowed freely for some, while others just stared, finally soaking in the one word they had agonized over for almost 3 grueling years. Guilty. Yet the nightmare wasn't quite over. The penalty phase was just kicking off. This next chapter brought a totally different kind of darkness. The panel wasn't debating his innocence anymore. That ship had sailed. Now, they had to figure out exactly how to punish the unforgivable. And in a tragedy this profound, justice is rarely black and white. His attorneys pivoted hard, locking onto one desperate mission: save their client from the absolute maximum penalty. To pull that off, they dragged his darkest skeletons out of the closet, starting from day one. His youth, his bloodline, the toxic wasteland he was raised in, and the very institutions that completely dropped the ball on protecting him. An official from California's Child Welfare Agency took the oath, painting a grim picture of a boy raised in total chaos. State files revealed 15 distinct probes into Zachary's safety when he was just a kid. He bounced around 9 separate residences. He was shoved through 23 different school systems. 23. That isn't a life, it's a survival tour. It was an existence built on shifting sand, forever adapting, forever watching any fleeting sense of security get ripped away. Then, the testifying agent dropped a bombshell. She didn't just read the sterile reports. She looked that jury in the eye and confessed that the system completely broke him. They pulled him from danger once, only to throw him right back into the fire. They had the power to save him, and they chose to look the other way. None of this erased the horror of his crimes. Nobody bought that excuse. But her words cast a chilling shadow over the courtroom. It forced an ugly truth into the light. Shattered systems breed shattered people. A reality society desperately wants to sweep under the rug. The panel soaked in every gritty detail. They had to balance the sheer brutality of the murder against the tragic backstory of the killer. It was a terrifying moral tightrope. The magistrate killed over 30 minutes, strictly laying out the legal guidelines, meticulously detailing the exact benchmarks they had to meet and the crushing burden resting on their shoulders. They vanished to debate, and then they came back. The verdict? 20 years behind bars just for breaking in. They slapped him with 2 life terms for the other horrific acts, paving the way for the ultimate penalty. Judging his crimes as unimaginably cruel, the panel hit him with the absolute harshest punishment allowed in Arkansas. The moment that fate was sealed, his legal team pulled the box, forcing every single juror to verbally own that lethal decision. Every last one of them confirmed it. The courtroom saga was dead. That dark legal chapter had finally slammed shut. For Bentonville, a town haunted by that grim November dawn for almost 3 years, the truth was finally out. It didn't heal the wound. Nothing ever could, but it guaranteed that the predator who stole Jersey Bridgman's life was exposed, cornered, and locked away for good. For a bloodline that had weathered pure hell, that scrap of justice meant everything. But a guilty tag, even an airtight one, is almost never the end of a murder story. The American justice machine is wired with endless loopholes and reviews. It's engineered to put extreme punishments under a microscope, tearing them apart before the ink ever truly dries. While there's a reason for that red tape, it's a nightmare for the victims' loved ones. The trauma doesn't stop just because the gavel drops. For Jersey's people, the closure they bled 3 years to get was about to slip right through their fingers again. Sitting in a maximum security lockdown out in Arkansas, Zachary officially triggered the appeals process. His defense squad zeroed in on a few sketchy legal moves they claimed ruined his trial. Their first target was a denied pre-trial request to just toss out the breaking and entering charge. Judge Brad Caron had completely shut that request down before the trial even started. His lawyers swore that specific rejection poisoned the entire verdict, insisting the judge botched the law. Their second line of attack hinged on what they called a massive, blown opportunity while the jury was watching. Was a crucial truth buried? The jury never even knew Zachary was ready to admit guilt to his darkest, most damning charge. Defense lawyers spun this as taking responsibility, arguing the panel should have heard it to potentially spare his life during sentencing. Their third strike aimed directly at those chilling interrogation tapes. His lawyers fiercely argued that everything he whispered to detectives should have been completely thrown out. The Arkansas Supreme Court scrutinized the claims, then shut them down cold. The guilty verdict stood. His punishment remained ironclad. Not a single defense maneuver possessed the legal muscle to overturn his grim fate. On paper, this ruling marked a massive, inescapable dead end. Zachary Hawley took his fight to the highest state tribunal possible, but the walls of his conviction did not crumble. Benton County prosecutor Nathan Smith felt a heavy, personal sense of relief, stepping far beyond mere courtroom victory. Though endless legal loops usually follow such dark crimes, he declared, "I pray this finalizes things so Jersey Bridgman's family never has to step foot in a courtroom again." It exposed a brutal truth lawyers usually keep buried. Every fresh motion, every sudden hearing, and every legal battle drags a shattered family right back into their absolute darkest nightmare. It forces Jersey's tragic name back onto cold, typed dockets. Strangers dissect her trauma over and over using sterile, clinical words. It guarantees an endless, agonizing psychological loop. Yet the shadows lingered. Zachary struck again, deploying Arkansas Rule 37, a desperate maneuver claiming his own trial lawyers completely failed him when it mattered most. He alleged his attorneys catastrophically botched the job by hiding his dark, twisted psychological past and the chilling depths of his mental health records from the sitting jury. The defense team insisted this buried medical evidence might have shifted his ultimate punishment, crying foul on the entire judicial process. It is a totally textbook move for desperate inmates. True crime veterans absolutely expected this predictable Hail Mary paperwork. Yet for relatives tortured by endless trials, stalling, and verdicts, nothing feels routine. Each paper bearing Jersey's name rips open healing wounds. The court saw right through it, his guilty status held. Right now, Zachary Hawley rots inside a maximum security Arkansas prison, facing the grim reality of his punishment. Every single attempt to shatter his murder conviction has utterly failed. Months later, Jersey's real dad, David Bridgman, spoke out from behind the iron bars of his own prison cell. It was an incredibly tense, deeply unsettling conversation to absorb. This guy was locked up for recklessly endangering his little girl, a father banned from even attending her tragic burial. His toxic mistakes had robbed Jersey of her innocence well before that fatal November 2012 day. Still, there he sat, pouring out his heart about her memory, confessing his suffocating guilt, and describing how the crushing news of her murder shattered him inside lockup. He claimed he never crossed paths with Zachary Hawley, only catching whispers of the killer's identity. Once condemned, Hawley finally broke his chilling silence, stating, "I am deeply sorry for the absolute hell I inflicted. Maybe someday, you might discover a way to pardon my sins." Guards instantly shackled him. Meanwhile, her mother vowed, "I will pour love into my surviving kids and keep mothering. I have to stay strong for my 2 little girls. Honestly, my life feels like one endless, waking funeral." We can finally stop reliving that horrific afternoon. Now, we just focus on our sweet baby and cherish the beautiful memories. We refuse to dwell on the agonizing terror anymore. Discovering the gruesome truth nearly broke Bridgman. He discussed his child with raw, unfiltered grief, not the fake, calculated tears of a seasoned convict, but the silent, crushing despair of a man locked in a cage, haunted by catastrophic life choices he cannot ever escape. He openly admitted his crippling drug habits destroyed his ability to protect Jersey. Though he denied being pure evil, he took full accountability for his catastrophic, life-altering blunders, permanent mistakes, and a horrifying failure to shield his daughter, a ghost he will carry to his grave. Did staring at cinderblock walls finally break the monster, or is he still hiding secrets behind bars? We will probably never know. One brutal fact remains. His supposed remorse couldn't bring back the innocent child he slaughtered. Jersey Bridgman's nightmare eventually rippled outward, catching fire across underground investigations and gripping countless listeners nationwide. Independent sleuths dug deep. Strangers who couldn't point to Bentonville, Arkansas, with a loaded gun, were suddenly captivated. They learned Jersey's name and uncovered the horrifying abuse she endured long before that fatal November darkness fell. The public saw the fragile child beneath the gruesome headlines. That human connection is the absolute pulse of this entire investigation. It is incredibly easy for a victim's identity to get completely swallowed up by the horrific spectacle of their own murder. The gory details often drown out the beautiful life that was stolen, reducing a human being to nothing but a tragic statistic. Jersey Bridgman demands justice beyond the grave. She was only 6 years old. She had navigated traumas most grown men couldn't stomach, betrayed by the exact institutions sworn to shield her from predators. Yet everyone who actually crossed her path, educators, locals, relatives, and caseworkers, painted the exact same picture. She was an effortlessly glowing, radiant spark of pure joy. The sort of kid whose mere presence demanded your attention and instantly melted away the darkest moods. Fiercely protective, she embraced being an older sibling with a profound empathy that totally defied her age. She would tell people she loved them to the moon and back, capturing an affection too massive for her tiny frame. She had just tasted a sliver of what a normal, unbroken childhood was actually supposed to be. A solid roof, daily classes, friendly locals, and a secure routine, the mundane safety nets most kids just blindly take for granted. Jersey clawed her way out of hell just to secure that basic peace. She was finally breathing easy right before a monster violently ripped it all away forever. Bentonville's residents still shoulder this trauma, unable to shake the nightmare. Those flickering vigil flames captured their initial, bleeding devastation. Classmates and teachers draped themselves in purple at Sugar Creek Elementary. A stunned neighborhood desperately tried to keep from shattering, grappling with a senseless, unspeakable evil that defies all logic. These were not just empty, hollow displays of grief. It was a united front screaming that Jersey mattered, ensuring she wouldn't fade into the cold dust of an archived police file. Fighting to honor the victim instead of the crime scene is the exact reason we drag these dark narratives into the light. We do not revel in the macabre or exploit the bloodshed. We do this because silence equals erasure, and amnesia only protects the guilty. Especially when it comes to a 6-year-old who spent her fleeting days hunting for the basic shelter she was owed. Jersey's brutal fate screams a terrifying, unavoidable truth. The boogeyman rarely wears a mask. Evil does not broadcast its arrival. It does not lurk in alleyways or stick out in a crowded room. Sometimes, it is the guy sharing your fence line. Sometimes, it is the babysitter you trust during a late shift. Or worse, it is standing right behind the yellow crime tape with you, faking tears and playing the concerned neighbor for weeks. That chilling psychological twist is what keeps you awake at 3 a.m. long after the blood washes away. It is not just the murder itself, but the killer's mundane disguise, a deceptive normality that acted as the ultimate bulletproof camouflage. Jersey affectionately referred to her killer as Uncle Zach. She gave him the pure, blind faith only a 6-year-old possesses, completely stripping away any defensive walls, because kids are wired for innocence and deserve unquestioned safety. Instead, he weaponized that vulnerability. The devastating fallout from his betrayal forged a permanent, suffocating burden for everyone she left behind. If this psychological descent rattled you, drop your thoughts down in the comments. I need to hear your theories on this madness. Let me know what city you are tuning in from. Your insights fuel this channel, and I comb through absolutely everything. Hit that subscribe button right now. We pull back the curtain on dark investigations constantly, driven by one singular motive. Unearthing the truth is mandatory, and these victims must be elevated above a cold, forgotten toe tag. Jersey Bridgman was so much more than the horrific final hours of her life. She was a bright, deeply loving kid who whispered the exact same sweet promise every night before sleeping to the moon and back. Never let them erase her name. The tragic story of Danielle Jones serves as a harrowing lesson that danger often wears a familiar face, hiding behind a facade of suburban normalcy. Danielle was the blueprint of a perfect kid, a vibrant 15-year-old who loved her pets and lived a routine life until she was betrayed by her own uncle, Stuart Campbell. This case teaches us the vital importance of honoring our instincts. For years, Danielle's parents sensed a gut-wrenching dread around Campbell, yet stayed silent to avoid family drama. We must learn that boundaries are sacred. A trusted guardian who violates personal space is not family. They are a predator. Furthermore, Danielle's legacy revolutionized justice through the power of digital truth. Her unique habit of typing exclusively in lowercase became a silent signature from the grave. When her killer tried to forge an alibi in all caps, her digital fingerprint exposed the monster. Never silence your intuition, and remember that even the smallest quirk can be a weapon for justice. Danielle's memory now protects others through Helen's law, ensuring that those who weaponize silence against grieving families remain behind bars. Vigilance is our greatest defense,